Good morning, haters. It's me, Jamie Taylor, and my good pal, Kendall.
Hey, Jamie.
Hi. Back with a brand new episode of I Hate Real Estate. How are you feeling today?
I'm doing good.
Are you feeling hateful?
Yes.
I'm feeling very hateful.
Now that I know what we're talking about today, I feel hateful.
Yeah, I felt vengeful. And for us, we don't have to worry about this because we're great, wonderfully, happily married couples. And you and Carrie have a great house, and me and Joey have a great house. But that is not always a situation when you are dealing with real estate and marital bliss, correct?
That's correct.
Have you ever dealt with a situation where real estate came up in a divorce?
A few times.
So we're going to talk about two situations that are present in my life. One that really towards the end of my real estate career was kind of a linchpin in, I got to get out of here. Some of these people are just ridiculous. And then the second one is a current situation I spent this weekend with a friend who's kind of dealing with some complications related to being married and owning property in Arkansas, and also not being married and owning property in Arkansas. So let's start off with what does it mean when people say a married property state?
I don't hear that term that often because states outside of Arkansas are community property states, and they refer to that. And then Arkansas is more of the standard. I think there's 10 community property states. Texas is the nearest one to us, but we're a state that recognizes joint ownership of property between a husband and a wife. And the way that it's divided up is if you are a husband and wife and you own a property together, unless the deed that you got the property specifically says that you don't own it jointly together, but both of your names are on it, then that's what the presumption is. And so that's how things pass.
But it's also like if you are not on the mortgage, but you're on the deed, you own the property.
Correct.
Okay.
You do not have to be responsible for the debt to own the property.
And there's a benefit to that, and then there's a downside to that, because also it's like right when you said that, my mind went like, who cares about a property that they don't pay for, right? But not just...
Oh, they do.
I'm just saying, though, that there's some benefit there, but there's also some downside. So, and it kind of brings me to where my situation turned out, which essentially there was a married couple that was no longer married by the time I came into the situation. I was asked to list the property for the sole owner of the property, who was a divorced male. So I went out there, I looked at the property, measured it, I gave it to the title company to get an estimated payoff of the proceeds based on his mortgage payoff. I did all those steps to make sure that I understood what I was getting into, like I would with any other listing. Put it on the market, sold it. I mean, the Jamie Taylor way, right? No, it flew off the market and it was a happy story and got a great offer, and we're ready to go. And, it was a kind of a complicated situation. So it was important that we got this offer quickly and that we executed and moved towards closing. And so we were on the way there, and suddenly, I'm talking 2 days before closing, no notice beforehand, I get a phone call from the title company saying, hey, we have a problem. The ex-wife won't sign the documents. And I'm like, well, what does she have to do with this? They have been divorced for 6 or 7 years. Like, I did all the research on this. Why? So they respond to me with, well, we put a quitclaim deed in the closing package, and she won't sign it because what she figured out is that there's proceeds on the house, and she wants her half.
Let me guess. They actually owned the property jointly. The deed was in 2 names.
Oh, yeah.
They got divorced. The court awarded him possession of the property.
Technically, yes. But also, when they got divorced, they did this interesting thing you might know about called a property settlement agreement, where you decide how everything's going to go. Because at the time, and here's a note for you if you don't know this, you don't have to sell your house when you go through a divorce. But if you do, and you make an agreement as to what to do with those proceeds, it doesn't matter if it's 100 years later, you have to follow it. And I don't think either one of them was thinking about that, because when she got the document, she was shocked. And let me just say, me too, because I was frustrated that, how did this not come up when you do the title search? How does it not come up saying like, hey, by the way, there's a property settlement agreement associated? You may be able to answer that question for me, but I say this to say, here we are in the transaction. We're under contract.
Once you get divorced, you become a tenant in common. It's no longer a joint tenancy, so that if husband died, wife would get the property automatically. Right. It doesn't pass that way anymore. Once you get divorced, even if you still own the property jointly after the divorce, if husband dies, the property passes to his heirs, not the ex-wife, unless he had a will that never changed the name, that kind of thing.
Or his property settlement agreement was no matter what happens.
Property settlement agreement says, well, property settlement agreement can't pass property on death. Technically, it has to be an instrument, a will, last will.
So it would have to be
But the property settlement agreement, it can say any number of things. And when I said the court awarded him possession, that's the court signs off on the property settlement agreement as well.
Yes.
So the court would have had to read through, approve what happened in that deal.
And it was kind of fair. It was When we sell this house, we split it 50-50.
And that's what it said.
Yeah, it was like, well, the proceeds will go.
See, some
50% her.
property settlement agreements. This is, I guess, free legal advice. Some property settlement agreements will just say, husband is awarded possession and ownership of the property. Wife is to execute a quitclaim deed or refinance. They're to refinance it out of wife's name within 6 months of today.
Well, and there's the question
and they'll never do it. But the flip side is what you're talking about, where the court actually just says you have your ownership interest. Wife has her ownership interest, husband has his ownership interest, and you maintain joint ownership. And then if you ever sell it, you split the proceeds. It sounds like that's what.
Yes, but what kind of my head started spinning when you said that a minute ago, because you split the tenancy for sure. But what if you're in a situation when you're not married to that person? Like, that's been a big issue, it seems like, in the secondary situation that we'll get to in a minute. But if they're not married, then it's really hard to kind of have a leg to stand on. And if you are in a financial position, like that's what it was just now. If I'm not on the mortgage, that's a whole nother thing, because I don't have to refinance it if I'm not on the mortgage and you're on the mortgage, but I'm on the deed.
Usually the court will say you have to execute a quitclaim deed transferring your interest in the property.
Give it to that
within
other
a
person.
certain amount of days.
So that would have been the solution to this problem, because that's why they slipped a quitclaim deed in there and said, hey, we'll just take this to closing and have her do it, because if she's willing to surrender her interest, then we're going to be fine. They're assuming that she's going to surrender her interest to sell it anyways. But what they don't realize is it's not an amicable situation. And even if it's 6 years later and there's $300 in proceeds, they're still going to fight over it, So I'm just like talking to both of them and trying to, not her, but to the title company and to the husband. And I'm like, you guys, there's a whole other family trying to move into your house in 2 days that has no other place to go. We're about to close. Okay. This is a very small thing in comparison to what you're putting out there to everybody else, title company, mortgage lender, me, like all of the people that are involved. And they're just heels in the ground, I'm not going to let them win kind of deal. And literally doesn't show up to closing. I hate real estate. So angry. So tell me all the recourse.
This is why I don't want to do divorces anymore and haven't done one in a long time, except by referral of friends. It's like a friend of a friend. I don't know.
You're like, I know who's going to win, so I'll do this. No,
I'm not the one that invented this, I'm sure, but I have the Walmart rule in divorce cases that if you're going to pay your attorney more than what you're fighting over, you shouldn't pay your attorney more. You should just let the other person have it and go replace it and be reasonable. But you get people, just like you said, that want to win, even though nobody's going to win in that situation.
Everybody lost. So I lost the commission, my time, my energy, my focus. I was so frustrated about the situation. Plus, I had to involve my attorney just to ask, get myself to the next level of like what to expect here. I had to deal with the other family explaining to the buyer's agent, and the buyer's side like, I'm sorry, he didn't show up. Heck, can you imagine getting that phone call? He didn't show up. And I felt like this is going to totally destroy my reputation. There's nothing I can do about it. The guy just didn't show up, wouldn't return my phone calls. I mean, ghosted me with no warning. It's 2021. I couldn't even find him on Facebook. So what about my recourse? I had some, right?
Yeah.
And I can sue him for performing.
Your commission.
Right? And then the other thing is, what about the wife? Can she come back now that she knows he's tried to sell it with her interest and sue for her interest and ask to be paid? Or how could she rectify this in any way? Or what's the best solution for these smart folks?
If she still has an ownership interest per the divorce decree, she could list the property with somebody and try to sell it. That's about the only recourse that she has.
Nothing else, huh?
If the property doesn't sell, then the divorce decree doesn't apply. She's not entitled to half of her proceeds.
I'm just really wishing that there was some other answer to this.
She could
you have to drag them in here and force them to close.
Technically, she might have a contempt motion she could file with the court and ask that the court order him to show up and sign. Again, I don't do that much of that part of the divorce law after the fact.
But the important fact is, when it comes down to real estate and ownership in this state, make sure when you get divorced that you figure that out.
Divorce decree language is very important, and it shocks me because it happens in a lot of cases. We file bankruptcies for people too. You'd be amazed how many bankruptcies result out of divorces. It's a ton.
It actually makes perfect sense, because you're literally, especially I was watching that that Netflix documentary where they break down everything in the world, and one of the things they're breaking down is the debt. They say that on average, most American households cannot handle a $400 emergency. And if that's the truth, and you're going through a divorce, which is way more expensive than $400, you're already going to have those emergency funds, but then also splitting this life that you built together, which is difficult in itself, but then financially, I imagine bankruptcy is like the first place you go.
That happens all the time.
Attorney's office.
I have an article that I wrote several years ago on on our bankruptcy website about divorce and bankruptcy and the process and what you should think about, because it's difficult.
You should probably send me that so I can put it on a link to this episode too, so that in case any of our listeners want to do some research or in that position. Unfortunately, it does happen. And if you're in that position and you need legal counsel, you might as well go ahead and get the best there is.
Okay.
So
I'll review it. I'll review it and make sure it's still current, because I think I wrote it like 8 years ago.
Okay, I'll proofread it for you.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. So anyways, that basically, and the reason I want to bring up this is because I've got another situation in my life right now where it's happening to a friend of mine that is in kind of a different situation, but similar. The split has happened, but they were not married, but they own property together. They're both on the mortgage and they're both on the deed. Who gets what?
Parker's in this situation right now.
Oh my gosh. Really?
Not a breakup. No,
Oh,
not
duh.
that
I know it's not a
situation.
breakup.
No. Yeah, they're getting married in January.
No, but he's got somebody that's dealing with this too. Okay.
Yep. I'm actually not even sure he's on the mortgage. I'm giving his personal info out here, but no, it's so it's just like any other joint ownership. It's just like, Jamie, you and I went and bought a piece of land together. Now, obviously, it's a little bit different because you actually have a mortgage on the property, but the ownership interest is just, it doesn't matter if you're together romantically in a relationship or not. It's just like any other joint ownership that you had with a non-spouse or a non-family member in Arkansas.
Well, and that makes sense when you're talking about looking at, I'm thinking about the property, but the mortgage is a whole different thing. And
but you have people all the time that a parent will co-sign on a mortgage, or if a business gets a mortgage, you might have somebody guarantee that mortgage.
Yeah, but they don't come and live with the business.
No,
and
they
don't
don't
live in their house. And that's kind of my big thing is, in this situation, it's kind of like a standoff, right? Because my question is, if one party leaves there, can't the other claim that, like...
The problem is you don't have this recourse of a divorce proceeding.
Right.
There's not a divorce proceeding. There's not a judge that can say this is going to be divided this way, or a judge orders the property to be sold. That happens all the time in divorce cases as well, is the judge will just say, before this case is over, we're listing this property, selling it, splitting the proceeds. We're not even going to decide ownership.
I like that judge because he's like, I'm not dealing with your crap.
A lot of judges do that. But that's the problem, is you don't have that option available when you're not married. And the only option, it's not even a good option. You could partition. You could file a partition action and force the property to be sold. But that's a multiple $1,000
so crazy
legal fee and a 6-month process, and you're not going to want to be dealing with
at that point. Just get a divorce because it's about the same.
You can't, though,
price.
if you're not married.
Yeah, true.
And yeah, if you're not married, you can't. The other option is to sell the property.
What about suing for your interest?
You can't force list the property.
Can you sue somebody for your interest even if you're not? Okay.
But the problem with the partition is the court's going to decide whether the property can be equitably divided. Literally, we're going to redeed this half to you and this half to you. Well, as you know, in the instance of a quarter-acre lot with a house on it, you're not going to be able to divide that 50-50. We're not going to be like the War of the Roses where they draw a white line around the house and say, this is your side, this is my side.
No, but technically in this scenario, and this is where my brain goes with it, and this is probably because I'm ridiculous, but the way I'm thinking of it is, okay, they both live in the house, they're both paying for it, okay? We know what it's worth, or we have a good idea what it's worth. If it's worth, let's throw a simple number out for easy math, $300,000, and they have a 50-50 interest in it, and they get an appraisal and it's 150 interest, at that point, then they partition, or could you just get an appraisal and go to court and be like, hey, judge, nope.
That's what partition causes the property to be appraised.
Okay.
Either by how the judge handles it. Usually it's by a set of commissioners.
What if you get a private appraisal?
The property, and then the judge actually determines the appraisal value.
So what if you actually got a private appraisal?
It's only evidence of what the value is. It's not established. The judge establishes the value.
Oh, so now we have judge appraisers. You know what? Look at this. Now I'm doing it. I'm just kidding.
No, that's the way it works. You get commissioner suggestions, you get appraisals done, whatever it may be, but the judge sets the value. And then the judge actually takes... this is a very new law, by the way. They changed the partition law was the same way for decades, and I think in 17 or 18 they changed it. There's not been a whole lot of cases out there that I've seen that have gone through the appellate system where there's opinions on how the court feels about those cases. But the way that the statute reads to me is that the judge considers what the commissioners report as to value, can consider third-party information such as appraisals performed by the parties, and can consider testimony by the parties about the condition of the property, things that are bad at the property, and then the judge can determine the value. And then everybody's given the opportunity to object to the judge's determination of value.
Which people love to do. Because if you want your house to be worth less, you're going to object. If you want it to be worth more, you're going to object. Yeah. I have people do that to me all the time.
The reason the appraisal law got changed is because you would have one wealthy family member owned joint property with like siblings, for example. and the siblings may not have been as well off financially, and the wealthy family member wanted the property. And so they would file the partition action, force the court to sell the property, and then they would buy that interest out. They would force buy the interests. Now, if you're the party that initiates a partition, you can't buy the property.
Oh, that's a good law, though. When did that change?
17, 18, something
17,
like that.
18, you said. Okay, because that's a big one, because I could see that being a
It
problem.
may have been earlier than that.
Just the majority partner buying out.
No, it was after 2015. It had to be, I think it was like January 1 of 17 when it happened, when it went into law, or maybe August of 17 when it went into law.
You know, that kind of brings up a whole new set of questions. When something changes, I've never even thought to ask you this, but like, I'm sure there's like when things change with realtors, we get a newsletter. I'm sure that there are things with you that things change and you get a letter. How often does it change in the real estate and in these kind of arenas where you're constantly having to be on your toes and look at the next?
Well, when the Supreme Court makes decisions, there's a place where they publish their opinions in a group that you can look at. Sometimes it's on a weekly basis. Sometimes they take breaks like the legislature does. And when those new opinions come out, you can go read them and figure out any new rulings that they've made, any new opinions, any new law that's been created, the interpretation of laws where they'll clarify something. And then we watch the legislative sessions as well, the laws that go into effect during the legislative session. Those typically either have an emergency clause attached with them where they go in effect immediately.
Like the moratoriums?
Yes. Some of them have a retroactive clause that means it applies to all events in the past as they exist. And then some of them will have a standard date, like an August 1st date of that year when those laws are to go into effect. And so you watch those.
Do you ever find yourself having to move something in trial faster because of a law change or wait it out until something passes? And I'm just curious about that because I'm thinking, like, can something, like, if something changed, I would hold off on my property sale. I would wait.
I don't think so. The only time I've really dealt with it in the Rice case that we had over in Lone Oak, they changed the law on how post-judgment and pre-judgment interest rates are calculated.
That's a big one.
Yeah, and the law as it sits, if it applies to our judgment, reduces the amount of interest money substantially. Like on the post-judgment side, it reduces it from 10% to 2.5% or something like that. But it's one of those deals where we filed the suit way before that law went into place, and there's no provision in it that says that it's retroactive to all existing cases. But it does say for judgments entered after a certain date, and our judgment was entered after that date. So we don't know what the Supreme Court's going to do with that.
And they're going to have to use a case like that, though, to set precedents.
Yeah, but in that situation, we weren't waiting on anything. I can't remember a situation we were waiting. The reason that I studied the new partition law is because we did have a case at that point in time that was going to be a potential partition, and our client was one of the ones wanting to work out the interest with her sister and was contemplating filing a partition. And we told her, if you're going to do this, you have to do it before X date when this law goes into effect, because if you don't, you can't buy the property.
And that's a big thing I was just thinking, because so many people probably try to solve that problem from an investment standpoint without knowing that up front. They might just jump into it and find out later that they can't even solve the problem in the way they anticipated anyways. Is that law, that's a nationwide thing, or is that just
No, it's Arkansas?
Okay. Would you say that Arkansas, as far as legislation goes, like, and I know we're a little bit off subject here, but I started thinking about it. What if someone like me, or you, or, well, you're a lawyer, so different, but what if someone without a law degree wanted to submit something to legislation because they worked in the field and they felt like this would be something, like barriers to entry or something? How would that go about? Do you even, is that something?
They can bring it to a lawyer.
And then you help them? Can
help. You can find, there's a publication list of lobbyists online where you can find a certain lobbyist, and it's also made, it has to be made a public record out there what companies that those lobbyists represent. So you can kind of see if the person you're contacting has an adverse interest to what you're wanting to get done.
Right.
Like if you are in opposition to something, you want to change something
You're
that's
like,
negative to real estate agents or to realtors, you probably shouldn't call the law firm that represents the Realtors Association.
Right.
Wouldn't be a good idea.
No.
But that's how you would do it.
Well, and that's the thing is, I think about these legislative things, and I think a lot of people probably just don't think that that is a possibility that you could write this, because it's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, just with respect to the education piece and to the piece of protection for the consumer. And I wonder who does that. But I think probably since the trades are so separate, there's not like one trade organization that's all real estate. There's realtors, home inspectors, appraisers, all that stuff. But anyways, I digress. So,
well, as you know, I'm not a very political person.
No.
In and of itself, but things that are going on right now have nothing to do with protecting consumers at all.
No. Well, and here's the thing. That's where I'm at right now, as far as I'm not either, but I think that in our industry, there's a reason why we started this show, was there's a lot of things that people need to know when they're getting in and out of property, and they just don't They don't understand. And
one thing you and I talked about already is the new renter protection that's going in place November 1st. We did a previous episode on that. I mean, that law got passed. We were the 50th state to pass
very last one.
habitability laws.
Yeah.
And it's fixing to happen. Those are the types of things that a normal investor might not know. In fact, I set up an LLC for somebody the other day who is buying rental properties here, lives in Illinois, had no idea that law was going into effect.
But here's what's interesting about that law going into effect and about that situation. And if you're listening and you're a consumer or a professional in the industry, I'll be political about this as far as here's my opinion. When you're buying property and you're concerned about the habitability laws because you want to make sure you don't have to meet certain standards, that's a problem. Now, when you're buying property and you want to make sure it's in good shape, great. But if I find out that you came to this state to buy something because it was easier to mess with your tenants, I will not say anything on recording. I will do what I can to legally assist your client in finding a solution to their problem.
It's about to get easier for tenants.
I know. November 1st, it will start getting easier. But that being said, if you're a landlord, you better tighten it up because people really need to live in spaces where, air conditioning and heat are a thing, running water, healthy surroundings.
But, we started this off talking about marriage and how it impacts property. The same thing is here, though. If you own a property, I get it all the time, where if you own a property with a spouse, you get divorced, you guys go your separate ways, but you keep the property as a rental. That happens all the time.
I'm sure it does because it's a business.
Constantly.
Yep.
It's just, and one party, either the husband or the wife, will manage that rental property.
Oh boy, and then it's like who's doing it what?
Well, if you then renew a contract with someone after November 1st of 2021, and they've got mold, they've got leaks, their running water's not working, they've got some kind of issue with the heating and air, and you don't fix it, the spouse that's not the one managing the property is just as responsible under the law as the party that's handling the management side of it.
Boy,
Something else to watch out for.
Yeah, you guys who are divorced with rental property better listen up.
I hadn't thought about it from that standpoint until we started talking about this, but that's going to happen.
I'm just making a note about divorced with rental property. That's going in the copy.
It happens all the time.
Well, and the thing is, you just gave me some really big insight into how that might work too, because sometimes people don't have interest in real estate. You've got someone who's really interested in it, somebody who's not. Someone who takes a very active role working in real estate, having that investment, somebody who has no idea what they're doing but lives in the house and collects the money. They split. This person gets distracted or overloaded. This person has no idea how to handle it. And then we did start talking about marriage, and you can bring it right back to that marriage relationship, landlord-tenant.
All of a sudden, you have the worst case scenario happen like you had that led to the law where you have a carbon monoxide detector go out on somebody and somebody dies in the house.
Yep.
And boom.
And it's over. And that's so, people don't think about how important it is to maintain not only a relationship with your properties and your property manager, but making sure that you are in good communication, whether you're married or not, to the co-owner. But it's interesting because all of this is happening, it seems like really quickly, and all of a sudden it's August. So we've got a couple more months before those laws come into effect. I hope that they're going to make situations better for tenants in the state. I've been a tenant in the state. I've been an owner in the state. It's a big difference in my experience, but I just happen to feel like we don't have that many great property managers in Central Arkansas. Personal opinion. So, all right, cool. Do you have anything else to talk about with marriage and divorce? Because I'm getting ready to tell these haters.
I'm sure we didn't cover everything that we could have covered, but...
Oh, of course not. That's because you know what happens? All is fair in love and real estate. And so when people get divorced, it's the same thing as when they buy a house. You got no idea.
You should have said all is fair in hate in real estate.
That's true. All is fair in hate in real estate. No, nothing's fair in hate is the thing.
No.
But that's the thing is, I love the idea of building a family and building a life around real estate. And when you get married to somebody and you double your income and you start really doing what marriage is about, which is doubling your joy and having your burdens and really starting to live that life together, this piece of it, the real estate piece, the investment piece, is a huge cornerstone to what your family can do. It tells you whether or not you have a ceiling. There's just lots that you can do with it. And that's why I originally fell in love with real estate. It can create anything you want it to create for you. However, when things go south and you don't handle it correctly, so I mean, that's another plug for you, don't ever do anything legally without an attorney.
Well, and you have to, nobody likes to think about the worst case scenario. You shouldn't go through life thinking about what's the worst case scenario every minute that you're alive.
Wait.
But at some point in time,
Really?
at some point in time, once a year, once every 6 months, you got to sit down and actually plan for contingencies of what if this happens? What if this occurs? You got to do that.
Yeah.
You can get stuck. I've seen people get stuck in a really bad position that don't.
Well, it's interesting because your demeanor is different than a lot of attorneys, and I think what makes you unique and special at what you do, which I've never told you before, so you can get a tissue if you need one. But what's interesting is you're very fair about that, but you're very much he's going to hurt me. You're very much a guidance attorney. And I think that that's really important. If you have an attorney and you have questions and they're not stopping to say, hey, have you checked on this in a while? Does this matter? If they're not getting rabbit holes when you're talking to them, that's a sign that they maybe don't have as much concern about what's going on. And I can say that you definitely have a thorough approach with all of your clients.
Well, thank you.
So you're welcome. I don't want to go to trial against you. I'm going to keep working for you.
Good.
So anyway,
you'd lose if you did.
Oh, well, I'm going to tell you this right now. I'm not going to lose. Don't say that. I just got back there. I just realized what you said.
If you go against me.
I'm not going against you. That's never going to happen. I will say this. I'm going to go against you on the soccer field soon. So I'm going to hold you accountable and say it on the air. You're coming to play soccer with me. Okay. We're playing soccer in our league like next week or the week after. So.
I think I'm like a 14-time state champ or something. I don't know.
Okay, everybody just be ready for the liability clause that he's going to put into this.
I'll bring them all one day and we'll just line them up here.
Let's do it. Speaking of which, I need insurance for a soccer tournament. We'll talk about that when we get off the air. So anyways, thank you so much for your time this morning. I really want to go figure out how to help my friend who is going to be moving out of that house, and I have given her your phone number.
All right.
She will be in touch. Thank you for all of your advice. And remember, folks, all is fair in love and real estate. Can you rule on this, please?
Yeah, it's hate in real estate.
Yes, but I need you to also tell people not to get married unless they read the property details first. Don't buy a house until you get married or something. There's got to be some sort of message in there.
You don't have to. You can do it. You just got to make sure you plan for any contingency.
Contingency plan. For the house, not the marriage.
All of the above.
Okay, everybody. Thank you, haters, for tuning in to another episode. We will see you next time the gavel has spoken. We appreciate you tuning in. Be safe out there, and remember, for your protection, get a home inspection.
Bye, Jamie.
We're out.